Caught his maid secretly using his computer, the CEO was angry, but the lines of code left him froze. "What do you think you're doing with my computer?" Joseph Walker's voice sliced through the silence like a thunderclap, sharp and commanding. His polished shoes clicked against the sleek marble floor as he stepped further into the office, the overhead lights throwing sharp reflections off the glass walls. At his desk, his private desk, sat a woman. Her back straightened instantly, fingers freezing mid-keystroke. She turned slowly, eyes wide, mouth parted in shock. Her blonde hair was tied loosely, a few strands clinging to her face. She wore a janitor's uniform with a badge that read Susan, but she looked nothing like someone who should be anywhere near a CEO's machine. I'm sorry," Susan Brooks stammered, standing up so fast her chair nearly tipped. "I didn't mean to. There was an error in the server log, and I noticed the backup sequence was skipping cycles. I just thought if I could realign the timestamp." Joseph raised his hand, cutting her off. "You thought you could what?" His voice dripped with disbelief. "You're a janitor. You don't belong anywhere near this terminal." He moved forward, fingers already reaching for the intercom to call security, but something on the screen caught his eye. He froze. The lines of code she had just written weren't random. They weren't amateur fumblings. They were precise, lean, and unmistakably familiar. His heart dropped a beat. He stepped closer to the desk, eyes scanning the code. The syntax, the unique shorthand, the comment tags, the indentation. It was like looking at a ghost, one he had tried for months to chase. These lines weren't just well written. They were the exact structure used by the anonymous developer who had saved his company from collapse 6 months ago. The security breach that nearly destroyed Walker Tech had been stopped by a last-minute patch, emailed in by someone who called themselves SB. They had vanished after that, never revealing their identity. Until now. "You wrote this?" he asked, but the anger in his tone had faded into something else, something closer to disbelief. Susan's cheeks flushed as she nodded slowly. "I didn't think anyone would notice. I saw the logs and I just couldn't ignore it. I know I shouldn't have touched anything, but—" "You're SB," Joseph said, more to himself than to her. She looked up at him then, really looked. Her eyes were frightened, yes, but not desperate. There was something steady behind them, a fire that hadn't quite gone out. "Yes," she said quietly. "Susan Brooks, SB." Joseph stared at her, his mind racing. He remembered the meetings with his IT department, the sleepless nights, the pressure from investors. No one could trace the origin of that patch. It had arrived like a miracle, and now it turned out it had come from the woman who emptied trash bins and wiped fingerprints from the conference table. "You're a janitor," he repeated, this time not as an insult but in confusion. "I wasn't always," she replied softly. "Before this, I was a software developer. Before, everything changed." Joseph leaned back slightly, eyes narrowing. "Changed how?" She hesitated, her shoulders tightening. "I had to walk away. It's complicated, but coding, it's what I do. Even now, even if no one sees it." He didn't answer. His mind spun, recalibrating everything he thought he knew about the people in his building, about her. He looked back at the screen, at the logic that had once saved him and was now being quietly typed by a woman who mopped the floors. "You shouldn't be here," he said, but the edge had completely left his voice. "I know," Susan said, her voice small. "Please, don't fire me. I just needed to help. That's all I was trying to do." He looked at her, at the trembling in her hands, at the fire still flickering in her eyes, and for the first time in a long while, Joseph Walker, CEO of Walker Tech, the man who never gave second chances, felt something shift. He stepped away from the desk, let his hand fall from the intercom. "I'm not firing you," he said slowly. "But tomorrow, noon, my office, you're going to tell me everything." Susan blinked in surprise. "You mean—" "I mean," Joseph cut in, his voice quieter now. "Someone like you doesn't just appear out of nowhere. And I want to know how the hell I didn't see you sooner." She didn't smile. but her shoulders eased just a little, and as he turned to leave, she looked back at the screen, her code still glowing quietly in the dark. Hope flickered. Joseph stood by the floor-to-ceiling window in his office, the Manhattan skyline glittering behind him. The city was quiet at this hour, but his mind was anything but. Behind him, Susan Brooks sat on the edge of the leather chair opposite his desk, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The room felt colder now, as if it, too, was holding its breath. "You really were the one who wrote that patch?" he asked, not turning around. "Yes," Susan said softly. "Why didn't you come forward?" Her fingers tightened. "Because no one would have believed me. And if they had, they would have used it against me." Joseph turned to face her. His expression had softened, but there was still something calculating in his gaze. Not suspicion, just the kind of scrutiny that came from being someone who never left anything to chance. "Explain," he said, folding his arms. Susan looked up at him, her blue eyes clear, though her voice trembled at first. "I used to work at Vinitech," she began. "Junior developer, contract position. No degree, but I proved myself fast. I learned every system they let me near, stayed late, built tools no one asked for. I thought I was building a future." Joseph nodded slowly, saying nothing. "Then one night I discovered something," she continued, "a quiet little back door in their billing module. At first I thought it was a bug, but the more I traced it, the more I realized it was deliberate. Someone high up was redirecting funds, tiny amounts, from customer transactions into a private shell account." She swallowed hard, her voice growing steadier. "I reported it, quietly, through internal channels. I didn't accuse anyone, just asked for it to be reviewed." Joseph's jaw tensed. He could already see where this was going. "They thanked me for my diligence. A week later, my badge stopped working. My login credentials were revoked. I was escorted out with a box of my things and a warning not to speak to the press." Her laugh was bitter. "They made sure I wouldn't. Word spread fast. Every job I applied to after that, radio silence. I was labeled a risk, a whistleblower, a problem." Joseph stepped around the desk and leaned against it, arms still folded. "And the code you sent to us?" "I found the vulnerability in your system by accident," she said. "I was doing janitorial work here one night when I heard your engineers talking about how nothing they tried was working. I looked at the logs, I saw the flaw, and I knew I could fix it. So I did, from a public terminal, using a burner email. I didn't want credit. I couldn't watch another company crash when I knew how to stop it." Her voice cracked at the last sentence. She looked down at her hands. But when she looked up again, her eyes were filled not with regret but with fire. "No one believes someone like me could write real code," she said. "So I stayed hidden, but I never stopped building." The silence between them stretched. Joseph stared at her, his thoughts racing. This woman, this janitor, had outsmarted $1 billion company, then quietly rescued another without asking for anything in return. She had been blacklisted not for incompetence, but for integrity. And he had walked past her in the hallway for months without seeing her. He felt a strange twist in his chest, part guilt, part awe. "How long have you been working here?" he asked quietly. 4 months, Susan said. "And you never thought to tell anyone who you were?" "I have a son," she replied. "He's 6. I couldn't risk losing this job, too. I needed to survive." Joseph exhaled slowly, the weight of her story pressing down on him. "You don't belong cleaning floors," he said at last. She smiled faintly. "Tell that to the people who blacklisted me." "No," Joseph said, shaking his head. "They were wrong, and I was blind." She looked at him, surprised. He straightened up, his voice firm. "Tomorrow we start over. Not just a meeting, a clean slate. I want to see what else you've built, what you're capable of, not as a janitor, but as the engineer who saved this company." Susan blinked, clearly taken aback. "You're serious?" "I am," he said, "and I'm sorry it took me this long to see you." For the first time in a long time, she let herself smile. Small, cautious, but real. It wasn't redemption, not yet, but it was a beginning. The cafe sat on a quiet corner of Brooklyn, tucked beneath ivy-covered brick, a place that smelled of old wood and fresh espresso. Joseph had chosen it for its privacy. No reporters, no cameras, just the low hum of conversation and the occasional hiss of the espresso machine. Susan sat at a corner table near the window, her posture a little stiff, eyes flitting from the coffee cup in front of her to the street beyond. She wore a navy blue cardigan over a plain blouse, her hair neatly tied back. She looked every bit like someone still trying to fit into a world that had once turned its back on her. Joseph arrived right on time, dressed down in a charcoal sweater and jeans, a subtle departure from his usual tailored armor. He offered a small nod as he slid into the seat across from her. "Thanks for meeting me," he said. Susan gave a slight smile. "Not many CEOs invite their janitors out for coffee. Not many janitors write code that saves entire corporations," he replied, and her smile grew a fraction wider. They talked. For the first time, Joseph asked about her ideas, her approach to systems design, how she'd taught herself advanced cybersecurity without formal training. She spoke with confidence, her voice steady and clear, occasionally gesturing with her hands as the fire in her returned. He listened. And then, as the waitress brought a second round of drinks, Joseph leaned forward, voice lower. "I want you on the inside," he said. "There's a project, AI-driven security for our infrastructure. We've hit a wall. I think you could take us through it." Susan blinked, surprised. "You want me to join? Officially?" "I want you to lead," he said. "Not under your initials, under your name." She didn't answer right away. Her eyes darted down to her cup, then back up. "You know what that would mean, right? My name in your system, my past exposed." "I do," Joseph said. "But I don't care what they say. I care what you can do." And just as she opened her mouth to respond, a familiar voice sliced through the warm air. "Tell me you're not serious." Both of them turned. Logan Pierce stood at the entrance, all sharp edges and corporate confidence. The chief operating officer of Walker Tech, Joseph's second-in-command, glanced between them with barely concealed disdain. "You've got to be kidding me," he said, walking toward their table. "Her?" Susan's face froze. "Logan," Joseph said, his tone a warning. Logan ignored him. "Do you even remember Vinitech? The lawsuit? The PR disaster? She's a scandal waiting to explode." "She wasn't the cause of that scandal," Joseph said, standing slowly. "No, but she carries it like a badge," Logan snapped. "The press won't care about the truth, Joseph. They'll see a whistleblower, a liability. The board will panic. Investors will run." He turned to Susan now, his voice cutting. "What are you doing here? Trying to climb back through the basement door? This company has too much at stake to gamble on someone like you." Susan's hands were clenched in her lap, her eyes were dry, her back straight, but the color had drained from her cheeks. Joseph opened his mouth, but for a second, just a second, he hesitated, and in that pause, everything fell apart. Susan stood. "I shouldn't have come," she said quietly. "I thought maybe this time would be different, but it's not." She looked at Joseph, just briefly, her expression unreadable. "Thank you for the coffee." She walked past Logan without a word, her heels silent on the hardwood floor. Joseph watched her go, a knot tightening in his chest. He turned back to Logan. "You shouldn't have come here," he said, voice low. "I came to stop you from making a mistake," Logan said coldly. "You're welcome." Joseph didn't respond. His eyes were still on the door, long after it had closed behind her, and in that moment, he realized something painful and clear. He had said nothing, and silence in the face of injustice was its own kind of betrayal. The door to the modest apartment creaked open, revealing chipped paint and worn carpet. Susan stood in the frame, brows lifting in surprise as she saw Joseph Walker standing there, holding a pizza box in one hand and a brightly colored Lego set in the other. "It's not bribery," he said dryly, "just dinner. And a peace offering for the little guy." Susan blinked, then stepped aside to let him in. He's in his room. As if on cue, a small, excited voice rang out. "Mom, who's that?" A blur of motion followed, and Noah, 6 years old, wide-eyed and full of energy, rushed into the room. His eyes locked onto the Lego box first. Joseph knelt down to his level. "Hi, Noah. I'm Mr. J. Thought you might like this." Noah looked up, suspicious for half a second, then grinned. "You brought me STEM Legos?" Joseph chuckled. "I did. Want to build with me?" "Yeah." Within minutes, the two were sitting cross-legged on the living room rug, Lego pieces scattered everywhere. Joseph carefully followed Noah's chaotic instructions while the boy narrated the building of a spaceship/lab/dragon fighting base with wild enthusiasm. From the kitchen, Susan watched quietly as she prepared a simple dinner. Her hands moved on autopilot while her eyes kept drifting back to the scene in the living room. Joseph laughed at one of Noah's jokes, then held up a crooked rocket proudly. Noah laughed so hard he snorted. Susan's eyes softened. Her voice was barely a whisper. "He hasn't laughed like that in months." Joseph looked up and met her gaze across the room. He didn't smile, but there was something warm in his eyes. Steady, present. Dinner was simple, grilled cheese sandwiches and apple slices, but the table felt alive with conversation. Noah sat between them, alternating bites with wild retellings of space battles and robot alliances. Joseph listened, asked follow-up questions, and even suggested adding wheels to the next rocket for faster moon escapes. After dinner, while Susan cleaned up, Joseph helped Noah collect the scattered Lego pieces. When the boy finally yawned, Joseph offered to read him a story. Susan paused at the doorway, watching Joseph sit on the edge of her son's bed, holding a worn picture book, reading with unexpected gentleness. When Joseph stepped back into the kitchen, Susan handed him a warm cup of tea. "Thank you," she said. He took the cup, cradling it in both hands. "For what?" "For being kind," she said. "For not running." Joseph leaned against the counter, his voice quiet. "I've spent most of my life running from things, mistakes, headlines, people. But this doesn't feel like something to run from." Susan looked down at her tea, unsure how to respond. Then her phone buzzed. She picked it up and froze. Her face went pale. "What is it?" Joseph asked. She turned the screen toward him, a blurry photo taken through the apartment window. Her, Joseph, and Noah at the table. Headline: CEO Walker and the Hacker Maid. After hours, scandal? Her hands began to shake. "No," she whispered. "No, no, no. This can't happen. Not again. They'll come after me. After Noah. I just got stable." Joseph gently took the phone from her, set it down, and poured more tea into her cup. He didn't speak right away, just stood beside her in silence, letting the panic ebb. Then, quietly, "I know what it's like to be judged by something you're not," he said. "To have your life turned into someone else's headline." Susan's eyes welled, but she held them back. Joseph placed the cup in her hands. "Let me help you carry this." It was not a promise, not a grand speech, just presence, steady, warm, unwavering. And Susan, for the first time in a very long time, let herself lean on someone else, just a little. The following weeks passed in a quiet storm of work, laughter, and a strange, beautiful new rhythm. Susan was no longer just the janitor. Under a temporary NDA and strict internal secrecy, she became an anonymous technical advisor on Walker Tech's most ambitious project, the AI Security Core. No one in the company knew who the mysterious SB really was, only Joseph and a few trusted engineers. But the results were immediate. Susan's code was precise, elegant, and unbelievably fast. The architecture she helped rebuild stabilized the entire infrastructure in record time. The core not only worked, it surpassed projections. Joseph's inner circle called it a miracle turnaround. He never said a word about her identity to anyone. One morning, Susan arrived at her desk, a tiny, unused server room that Joseph had quietly converted into her workspace, to find a new laptop waiting for her. Matte black, sleek, powerful. She opened the lid, The screen flickered to life, revealing a single line of text on a dark background. "This belongs to someone extraordinary. Build without fear." "No, she. She didn't cry, but her hand hovered over the keyboard for a long moment, fingers trembling ever so slightly, before she typed her first line of code on it. Outside of work, the bond between Joseph and Noah had grown effortlessly. Every Saturday evening became their tradition: pizza, cartoons, and Legos scattered across the coffee table. Noah took to calling him Captain Lego, especially after Joseph helped him construct a 3-foot-tall robot with a built-in laser cannon and a snack drawer. One night, Susan paused at the hallway entrance. She stood quietly, watching her son laugh so hard he fell sideways onto Joseph's lap, while Joseph mock-growled in defeat at losing a Lego battle. The warmth in her chest grew thick, painful, beautiful. She blinked rapidly and stepped back before either of them noticed the tears in her eyes. But peace never lasted long. It came in the form of a memo, cold, formal, and devastating. Susan was being called for a clarification meeting with the Walker Tech board. Logan Pierce had quietly submitted a background file on her. Everything about her past at Vinatech, the whistleblowing incident, the blacklisting, the scandal. Joseph found out 30 minutes after the summons had been issued. He burst into the meeting room, document in hand. "Who signed off on this?" he demanded. Logan didn't flinch. "The board has a right to know who's shaping our most sensitive system." "She's the reason the system exists in the first place." "She's a risk," Logan said coldly, "and you're compromising this company by protecting her." That evening, Joseph drove straight to Susan's apartment. She was sitting at the table, staring at the printed letter in her hands. "They know," she said without looking up. "They're going to tear me apart." "No, they're not," he said firmly. "I'm handling it." She shook her head. "I can't do this again. I can't go through another round of questions and judgment and being made to feel like I don't deserve to be where I am." Her voice broke. Joseph stepped forward, took the paper from her hands, and gently pulled her to her feet. "We're not running from this," he said. The next morning, in the elevator to the 40th floor, Susan stood rigid beside him, silent. Her hands were cold, her jaw tight. Joseph reached out, took her hand and held it, not as a gesture, as a grounding. "I'm not letting them take away what you've built," he said, voice low and unwavering. "Not again." She looked at him, truly looked, and for the first time she believed he meant it. No conditions, no pity, just belief. And it was that belief that kept her walking when the elevator doors opened and the room full of questions waited on the other side. Cameras flashed like strobe lights across the press hall, reporters jostling for position as Joseph Walker stepped up to the podium. His face was composed, but his jaw was tight with resolve. Behind him, a large display showed the company's latest achievement. The AI Security Core. "What you see on this screen," he began, "wasn't built by chance. It wasn't the product of a boardroom or a committee. It was the work of one brilliant engineer, one whose name you don't know. Yet." He paused. The room leaned forward. "I'm here today to tell you the truth. The architect of the system that saved Walker Tech twice is Susan Brooks." A collective murmur rippled through the crowd. "She's not a scandal," he continued. "She's not a risk. She's a builder, a protector, and the future of our company." The headlines would run wild with it within the hour, but Joseph didn't care. The truth mattered more. That night, Susan sat curled up on her sofa, staring out the window at the lights of Manhattan. Her laptop lay untouched on the table beside her. Her hands fidgeted with the sleeve of her sweater. She hadn't said a word in hours. Joseph was sitting a few feet away, on the floor beside the open balcony door. The spring air drifted in, cool, calm, but not enough to settle her nerves. "I'm not ready," she finally whispered. "You are," he said gently. "What if they tear me apart? What if they twist everything again?" Joseph looked out into the city. "Years ago, before I founded Walker Tech, I was running IT for a private bank. One night the server went down. Hard. smoke, data loss, panic, everything. I lost $2 million in encrypted transactions. Gone. Susan glanced at him, surprised. People wanted me fired. I almost quit. But I stayed. I built something better. He turned to face her. We don't always get second chances, he said. But you made your own. That's strength. Susan looked down at her hands. I don't feel strong. You don't have to feel it, he said. You just have to show up. The next morning, the courtroom was packed. Attorneys, executives, media personnel buzzing like bees. Vinitech's lawyers were confident, polished, and armed with years-old accusations and technical jargon. Their case, Susan Brooks had illegally accessed and modified proprietary software while employed there. When it was her turn to testify, Susan stood straight. Calm, clear, she presented her original code, time-stamped, documented, and backed by log history. She explained every line, every function, every intention behind the architecture. Then she pulled up her development timeline, proving that her patch, the one she sent anonymously to WalkerTech, had been built from scratch on her personal laptop, long after she left Vinitech. The opposing counsel tried to rattle her with accusations and hypotheticals, but she stayed grounded, her voice unwavering. When she stepped down from the stand, there was a hush, and then the judge ruled. Motion to dismiss, granted. Case closed. Outside, the steps of the courthouse were swarmed with cameras. Joseph reached for Susan's arm, ready to guide her through, but she paused and turned to the crowd. I'm not here to clean up anyone's mess, she said, voice firm. I'm here because I built something that mattered, and I won't hide anymore. Flashes popped, questions flew. She raised her hand. And for the record, I don't work for Joseph Walker, she added. I work with him. Inside the building, behind the glass doors, Joseph watched her. Pride welled up in his chest, tight and raw. Not just pride in what she had accomplished, but in who she had become. She didn't need saving. She never had. But he was honored, deeply honored to walk beside her now. When she turned back to him, her eyes met his, and for a single breath in the chaos, it was just the two of them again. Equal, and finally, seen. The main hall of the National Tech Conference pulsed with anticipation. Rows upon rows of professionals, investors, and engineers filled the seats, their eyes fixed on the stage. Logos of global tech giants blinked across massive LED screens. But tonight, all eyes were waiting for one person. Backstage, Susan Brooks stood in the wings, clutching a simple note card in one hand. She wore a tailored navy blue blazer, her blonde hair pinned neatly back. No badge labeled her as guest or support. The name on the screen behind the podium read Chief Technology Officer Walker Tech. Her breath caught as the announcer's voice boomed across the hall. Please welcome the brilliant mind behind the AI Security Core, a woman who changed the future of tech from the shadows, Susan Brooks. Applause erupted. She stepped onto the stage, not with bravado, but with quiet confidence, her heels clicking steadily as she approached the microphone. She paused, took in the sea of faces, and smiled. I never imagined I'd be here, she began. Not because I doubted my work, but because I was told over and over that someone like me didn't belong. She held the silence for a moment. I used to be a janitor, not metaphorically, literally. I cleaned the offices of the very people designing systems I knew I could improve. I wasn't invisible because I had nothing to offer. I was invisible because no one ever asked if I did. A hush fell over the crowd. I didn't have a degree. I didn't have connections. I had a son to raise, a past I couldn't erase, and code I wrote at night while he slept. She looked down at the card in her hand, then folded it quietly and placed it in her pocket. I built in silence, but I never stopped building. Her voice strengthened. And today, I'm standing here not as a token, not as an exception, but as proof that brilliance doesn't come with a title, and courage doesn't wait for permission. A pause. Talent has no title. Courage needs no permission. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then the entire room rose to its feet. Applause thundered, People clapped, cheered, some even wiped their eyes. The headlines would come quickly, "The Invisible Engineer Who Changed the Game." But in that moment, Susan wasn't thinking about news cycles or tech blogs. She was thinking about the woman she used to be, and the little boy waiting for her backstage. An hour later, Susan walked through the quiet hallway behind the main stage. She passed bouquets, handshakes, congratulations. She finally stepped into the private lounge where Joseph sat on a couch, his coat draped over his shoulder, and in his arms, Noah slept soundly, curled against his chest, a half-finished juice box still clutched in one small hand. Joseph looked up as she entered. He didn't say a word, just smiled. Susan crossed the room slowly. Her heels no longer clicked. They barely made a sound. She stopped beside him, looking down at the man who had waited, held, stayed. Then, gently, she placed a hand on his shoulder. Her eyes were soft, full. "You stayed the whole time?" she whispered. "Wouldn't miss it for the world," he murmured, careful not to wake the boy. She nodded, then sat beside him, close. No words were needed after that, not tonight. The leaves in Central Park had turned to gold and fire. Crisp autumn air rustled through the trees, scattering little bursts of color along the winding path. The late afternoon sun dipped low behind the skyline, casting a golden hue over everything it touched. Joseph Walker stood at the edge of a quiet clearing, hands on his hips, a playful smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. "You sure about this, buddy?" he asked. Noah, bundled in a puffy red jacket and full of uncontainable energy, bounced in place. "Oh, 100%, the boy shouted. "First one to the bench wins." Joseph glanced at the nearby bench where Susan sat watching them, arms crossed, smiling. "All right," Joseph said. "On your mark. Get set. Go." Noah took off like a rocket. Joseph ran after him, but just enough. He slowed a little when Noah looked back, then exaggerated his stumble on a patch of leaves. Noah squealed with delight as he reached the bench first and turned triumphantly. "I win! I'm the fastest!" Joseph, panting dramatically, collapsed onto the grass beside the path. "Fastest engineer in the city," he declared, throwing his arms up in surrender. Susan laughed, a real, full laugh that bubbled out of her as she sat on the bench, cheeks flushed from the wind. Noah darted back to Joseph and flopped down beside him, both of them laughing. Eventually, Joseph stood and brushed the leaves from his coat. He walked over to Susan, reaching out his hand. She looked up at him and took it without hesitation. Noah raced ahead down the path, twirling in circles beneath the trees, and Joseph and Susan walked hand in hand behind him, their steps easy, unhurried. Susan glanced sideways at him. "I used to think there was no space in this world for someone like me," she said quietly. Joseph squeezed her hand. "Then you wrote your own place into it." She smiled, her heart full, not just of love, but of peace, of belonging, of finally being seen for exactly who she was and knowing it was enough. They walked like that until the light began to fade. 3 figures in the amber glow, one little boy skipping joyfully ahead, and 2 people who had weathered fire and judgment and fear and come out stronger. Together, a family, not defined by title or timing, but by choice. And the story, at last, had found its beginning. Sometimes, the strongest people are the ones no one notices until they rewrite the rules. Susan didn't just find a second chance. She created one. With courage, code, and quiet resilience, she proved that even those pushed to the margins can rise, can lead, can change the game. And Joseph? He didn't just see her, he stood with her. Because love in its truest form doesn't rescue, it recognizes. If this story moved you, touched your heart, or reminded you that everyone deserves a place to shine, don't forget to subscribe to Soul-Stirring Stories, where every story touched the heart and every ending is a new beginning. Click subscribe and turn on the bell so you never miss the next unforgettable journey.